The fire at the Blue Springs lab was the top news story in the nation. Most people who did not live in and around Blue Springs had never heard of this high-tech company. No one knew about Blue Springs lab developing the time travel system. This was a closely guarded secret. Kathy did not know what to do because she did not have anyone she could share this story with. Even if she could, they would not believe her. How could you confide with someone, telling them you had a husband and child who lived in the year 1959? Kathy also refused to search the internet for any news of James and Kathleen because she would try to stay positive and think the Blue Springs lab could produce the equipment so she could return to 1959. She did not want to uncover any information that would tell her she would never be able to return. If James and Kathleen were lost to Kathy in 1959, she could someday see Kathleen again, but she would be 60 years old in the year 2019. That is, if Kathleen was alive. Kathy doubted James would live to be 97, so seeing him again, if she was not able to travel back, would probably never happen. Kathy would know more about what her chances of ever going back to 1959 was after she could speak with some of the Blue Springs lab scientists. Most of them lived in the Blue Springs area, and she had sent them a text and email messages, but they had not answered her. They would not know of her marriage and her child, Kathleen. Kathy was now understanding why they were warning her not to get romantically involved with someone in 1959. She wished she had followed their advice. It was impossible to come to grips with how lonely Kathy felt. It was like her life had ended, and she was regretting she decided to come back to 2019. She was completely out of control of this. Kathy knew if she had not come back on her own, the scientists would have brought her back anyway. The depression Kathy felt was almost more than she could stand. She spent most of her alone time crying, but she knew she had to pull it together and try to stay focused on getting back to 1959. Her only hope was the people who developed the machine could build another one, or they may have recovered it from the fire. Kathy knew this was wishful thinking. When the fire marshal had concluded his investigation, they opened the area up to the Blue Springs lab executives and scientists. Most of the people who work for the Blue Springs lab were not aware of the time machine project. Kathy parked her Volkswagen at the guard entrance to the lab. After she presented her credentials to the guard, Kathy started to walk up to the remains of the building. One of the scientists was walking up the road to the entrance and saw Kathy. He yelled for her to wait on him. The first thing she said to him was, "I did not follow your advice, and I have a husband and a baby girl stuck back in 1959. The scientist was silent as they continued to walk up to the shell of the burnout building. The scientist finally said, I was afraid something like this would happen to you. I can only imagine how you feel. I must tell you the machine was destroyed, and I cannot tell you when we can produce another one. It could take years for us to redevelop one. Kathy did not have any expectations the machine would be intact, and in a short while it would be up and working. She asked the scientists if they could keep in close contact until she could get back to her husband and daughter. He told her he would stay in close contact, and if they could redevelop, she would be the first one they would let use it. He told her they were stuck on a 60-year time frame, and if it took 5 years to complete, when she went back it would be 1965, and her daughter would be 5 years old. Kathy needed some money, and she remembered the coins she and James had purchased and hid. She would go dig them up if James hadn't retrieved them already. The value of the coins for collectors would give her an income until she could determine what to do. Kathy knew the exact location, so she headed to the North Georgia mountains to retrieve the coins. Kathy used a small shovel to dig in the spot where she and James had buried the coins 60 years ago. Kathy was overcome with emotions, and she sat down on a rock and cried. She finally pulled herself together and started to dig again. When the shovel hit the container, it was like traveling back in time, and she could remember how she and James had a good time hiking up into the Georgia mountains to bury the coins. She pulled the box out of the hole and opened it. The first thing she saw was a note from James. The note read, "Kathy, I knew when you did not return, something must have happened. I always had a fear something like this would happen. Then I thought about the coins and knew if you needed money, you would come and retrieve them. I came up to this spot when I was afraid you would not return, knowing I could communicate with you with this box of coins. Kathleen is just fine, and I will take good care of her until you return. As you know, we can do nothing on our end. I'm going to try and think positive for Kathleen because she should not have a dad that is sad all the time. I have decided I will never tell her about the time travel. I will be gone when you read this note, but Kathleen will be 60 years old somewhere in 1959. She will not be looking for you because I never shared any of the information with her. I have decided to tell her when she is old enough that you disappeared on a missionary trip in Africa. I have included a hiking map that will give you locations where I am placing letters to you. I will continue to do this until you return to us. We love you." Kathy's heart was breaking, but she too would need to stay strong as she waited for the scientist to rebuild another machine. The coin dealer could hardly believe the condition of the coins Kathy had. He purchased all she had, and she deposited the money in her bank account. She had more pressing things to think about other than paying taxes on a windfall. The amount was huge, and she would have enough money to keep her comfortable while she tried to return to James and Kathleen. Kathy continued to skip an internet search because she wanted to stay positive. She would be able to return to 1959. Kathy continued to go to the locations where James said he would leave notes to her, and the last one she received gave her hope that she would return to 1959. The note from James read, "Kathy, as I place this note in the hidden box, I am sure you will read it 60 years from today. That thought alone makes my head spin. Today, a mysterious man approached me and said he was part of a research team that had stolen some time machine plans from the Blue Springs lab. One of the scientists you walked up to the burnout building with, because he saw you that day and said he's a spy who was planted by a foreign government. If you will contact him and tell him you know about the spying, he will help you use a foreign government's time machine to return to 1959. Tell him if he doesn't help you, you will turn him in to the authorities. If you go to the next location for another note, I will have placed it in that location after I had all the information telling you what to do. I love you, James."